go a bit deeper to what is really is and how we are using it now. Okay, so I will start with what is the client heritage history in our view. So the client heritage history for Lao, just the database of the persons and the key demographic the public health services in Lao. But this client heritage history is not just only the database format, it's also will issue the client health ID that will be used for many health programs now. So, but the client health registry is not only for Lao citizens, because in other countries we have CRVS. The CRVS in Lao is also focusing mainly for Lao citizens, but client health registry is more than that. And we see in the when we were doing COVID, we gave vaccines to foreigners as well, and this client health registry is kind of the same. So foreigners or non-Lao citizens also will have the ID and can receive health service in Lao. And the last one is also important. This is the point that why we need to do right in Lao, because there are many health programs starting to enter data as individual. There are many hospital management information system as well, and there are many other software that are tracking client. There's no linkage between those systems, so we have this Laos. Since we are using this tool for many health programs, we already have the the database from the COVID, so we utilize that and made it as the client health history for Laos. Just a bit on the data in the client health registry. So as I mentioned, the client health registry is just a database where you collect or store information of the clients, and there are basic details about the client. So first name, last name, date of birth, order ID like passport or citizen ID if they have. Also what blood group, ethnicity, racial status, occupation, and education. Going back to the first slide, so now the kind of at the many health programs. Basically, instead of each program talking to each other, we talk them and then all the software that we like to use or to access to client data, so we can take to CHR. We'll talk a little bit about the programs, and then I would like to mention about what part as well in terms of CRVS. Talk about CRVS for now. Like to connect with CRVS. In terms of CRVS, is very crucial for now. Start with this information. So from the very this information, 90% of the death happen outside of us. That's also due to how the then the last thing is hospital spend life. So it's very difficult for health area for health to collect this information. Another part is also the birth. Birth around 30% happen outside of facilities. Another reason is mainly because of the people can travel to neighboring countries where they have higher standard of healthcare service. People usually cross the border to get the service in the neighboring country, and that's very difficult for allowed to have the data. And there are so many percentage that people have service not but through the linkage between CRVS, that you get service somewhere else for private hospital or from anywhere outside the country or outside the facility. At the end of the day, they will real success. for debt for administration, and that will help for data that we cannot health system from the government you can get the data from that system, and that will be beneficial for your program like the AI. For example, the note may happen at the private facilities or Alzheimer's clinics. When they do the registration at Mohan, you can get that information that how we program, especially that child, make sure that the child that um, that deliver outside of countries or from somewhere else get the right or the correct vaccines. So this is what we are currently doing right now. To simplify one, is just when the birth happen, we also send data to ECRVS. So when the birth register in our system, we send over to them. They will be the one to check to verify. When they issue the birth certificate, they will confirm and give us the citizen ID to help, and that we can continue with the rest. And I will not go into the detail, but you can have the slide on the technical side. And same thing for BAMI for integration. In Laos, there are many hospitals are adopting uh, the hospital information system, and many of them are using BAMI right now. And there is a need that anyway people can visit any facility, their data can be captured through this system, but at the end of the day, it will be linked to DHS2. And for BAMI as well, because they need to have the same ID. And before they can enroll the patient into their system, they need to talk to talk to our CHR first to see if the person is already enrolled. And if that person already enrolled, then they can just retrieve that information with the ID and continue the treatment. Or if the new patient, they can inform DHS2 about the new patient and then get the CHID and continue with the treatment. So that's basically with what we are doing right now with CHR. And the CHR right now is only for the health side, and within the health, for the health worker, for the hospitals. Another possibility, we are thinking like what we did with COVID, where we have the people need to have this proof of vaccination, right? When they travel, they need to show this. And we can, the same thing can be done now because we have the CHR, the citizen can get their own data and also retrieve all the history that they need. Maybe we can start with the immunization. That's now will be the requirement, right? Before the child can get to school, you need to show that you get all the required vaccines. And to have that information, at the moment, you just need to have your book and then visit facilities to certify. But with this app, you already have your data in the database. You can just retrieve with to retrieve your information using your credential, and that's something we can do with the CHR, and that's the plan that we would need to do in the future. And that's all for the CHR. So I'm not sure you would like to have one or the presentation and then question, or can do the question now.
So I think we'll have one more presentation before we open it up for questions. So I'll ask
Thank
a
you so much.
big round of applause for Sam. So if I can ask Yuri to come up, and he'll share with you some information.
Yeah, on screen. Okay. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Nice to be presenting here. I'll quickly explain why I'm standing on this stage. Last year in Sri Lanka, I was presenting the use case in Uzbekistan, and on behalf of the MOH and the NTP program, we were talking about the implementation that we started in Central Asia. And yeah, so I hope you were wondering how it went. And we have launched a TB electronic registry implementation in Uzbekistan this summer. A country with 35 million people and a lot of cases of TB. And this implementation led to something that I'm going to share with you today, which we call the DHIS2 Civil Registry Lookup. So, and I will also explain how a use case turned this into something that can be global good. So, Uzbekistan has started an electronic TB registry, which is a very complex program that already incorporates and will incorporate several modules, beginning from the registry itself, the laboratory module, the screening and the contact tracing module, then surveillance reporting, medical statistics reporting, a plan to transition from paper forms to electronic forms, and then the integration with the National Medical Information System. You can see that from the images that I've put, that apart from a country being very advanced IT-wise, there's also very low coverage and very low literacy digitally on the level of districts and regions. And so there's a lot of capacity, but it needs to be organized. It needs to be rearranged. Also, sometimes the mentality within the organizations and government has to change in order for innovations to work. So what was the use case here? We have in the tracker system itself, when registering a TB case, and I've just put a screenshot from the DHS, so we have 18 data points for each case. And I think within the first week of the implementation, they registered 3,000 cases. We are dealing with a lot of data that has to be entered into the system. Some of it, most likely just for, I would say, bureaucratic purposes, but that's something that the country needs. But at the same time, as we have that demand, we have very low digital literacy skills among the personnel in districts and regions. You know this probably from your countries. These are people that are close to retirement age. They're working in these facilities, entering data, and sometimes they are working with several data entry systems, starting from paper, Excel. Then an example of this in this screenshot is an old MS-DOS, totally isolated from internet, that they call digital. And we want to bring it all together into one unified tracker. So then we have a lot of duplications and inconsistent data. We have two alphabets used in the country. So that creates a big mess. So we had to find a solution to support the country in finding some way forward with that. On the other hand, the government and the ministries that advance much more rapidly with digitalization, they require integration with national systems. They require data exchange between the programs. And so part of their requirement for a platform like DHIS2 to become a nationally owned system is the fact that it needs to be integrated. And so we had the request to set up a civil registry integration. And uh, that's when we started to think of the principles of, what partially what Ula was sharing yesterday, is that how we can do that, how we can turn that into something that can be a public good. So what was needed to be done? We had to automatically fill in the demographic information from existing civil registry when registering a new tracked entity in the capture app. Okay? And optionally correct the data that was previously entered, which might have been incorrect. Is this the first time it has been done? No. There have been several cases where such integrations were built. One of the latest one was Norway during the COVID time, where the integration with the civil registry has been set up. But all that required some complex tweaking of the code, and sometimes forking the system. So with the new developments and updates in the DHS2, more things became available and easier achievable. So what was the goal of the core team at UIO to achieve with this? So we wanted to avoid forking DHS2 and Capture app. We wanted to support the adaptation to different civil registries or any DHS2 metadata. And we wanted to provide strong security and privacy guarantees using those DHS2 features, and then allow straightforward development of custom solutions. What was the solution that we came up with? It was to develop a reference implementation which can be used and adapted by any country, by any organization, following the best practices and using native DHS2 features. So this reference implementation is already fully functional. It's self-contained example of a DHS2 instance integrated with a civil registry. And in addition to serving as an example, it can be adapted and modified for use. So what does it consist of? I'll go in a few details, just enough for you to get an idea of what it is. So with the newly available plugins in the DHS2, we have made a form field plugin in Capture app. And if you were attending, you would have seen in the screenshot there was a search button next to an attribute in Capture. And then we have an API route that communicates with the upstream services. And the team has built middleware component, a camel middleware, with customizable transformation and authorization support. And this is something that you might want, or an implementation might want to adapt, depending on what registry or what platform you want to integrate with. And since it's a reference implementation, there are a few additional components were added. So an example upstream civil registry was created, and an auth2 authentication service. So these were to demonstrate the solution, but in a real implementation in a real country, this would already exist or already be present. So you will just need the plugin and the middleware to adapt. Here is the flow, or the flow chart of this plugin. So here we have a civil registry where the payload will be exchanged using, as an example, FHIR standards. And on the other side, you have the DHS2 and the plugin in the Capture app in the browser, communicating with the middleware, and then through authentication, receiving the data and putting it back into the browser. Why this middleware has been set up? It's because the thousands of users that you have in your system, they do not necessarily have access to the civil registry. So the that middleware handles the transaction and is always in the authenticated state. And only admins of the system have access to configuring that middleware. And so to make sure that the users, by searching in the civil registry, may get the information at any time without having direct access to the civil registry itself. So, and this configuration is available in GitHub, and with clear instructions on how to test it. So you could set it up locally to try, and then you could see whether you need it in your implementations. That definitely will, of course, require tracker and integration with registries if needed. So I think that was it from me. Here is just an example of that it's live. As you can see, here we have the capture app, and by putting the ID, we're searching for it, and instantly we get the data filled in for our case in the app. So with this, thank you, and pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Yuri. So just before we move on to the next presentation, are there any questions for our first two presenters, either Yuri on the Uzbekistan use case or Sam on the client health register? Yes.
Thank you for a nice presentation. Two questions actually. First thing is auth 2 authentication. So is it the auth 2 authentication required for the CRVS or our side, means the DHS to middleware size? And second thing is why need FHIR to be communicate with the CRVS? Because most of the country has the CRVS system, might not have the FHIR built in because it's not the health system.
Mhm.
So why don't you use the REST and other protocols?
Okay, I will start with the second question. And as little as technical I am, I will just say that I mentioned FHIR because the use case of Uzbekistan, it was a FHIR-based civil registry. But the idea of that mock-up reference implementation is to be able to link to any. It does not have to be FHIR. So you just, the middleware would be used as a translation tool, and whatever parameters you would have there, that you'll be able to set it up. And auth 2 authentication, I think that's, I would be skeptical taking that question now, but I guess it's on the side of DHS too. Yes. No. On the. Okay. John.
So on the off two, it's usually on the other side, because like even with LAW or other registration, we have to, they will give one username, right? In DHIS2, like what we have multiple users, different hospitals are searching by their user. So the middleware, what we takes on is the DHIS2 connector and with their authentication. It's not the DHIS2 user, but it's the account what they give it to us.
That's fine. That is normal, because besides authentication, you have to produce or give them a key for the whitelisting. But my question was whether there's need to be auth 2 or any type of authentication. Because if you were constrained to auth 2, that will be very dangerous, because that system might not have, because we don't have control over the national CRVS system.
Okay, I think the answer here is very clear. And in the diagram, it showed that the auth 2 service is a part that was added to the reference implementation as an example. But if you have a component that's not auth 2, then you will just need the plugin and the middleware for it.
Any other questions for Yuri or Sam? Yes, in the back.
Yeah, so question on what I have seen as a demo. Have you had any challenges trying to address like uh, getting the consent from the personal record owner? Because I saw the automation happening, but were there any concerns on getting the consent first before the authentication happens, or is it not an issue in that implementation?
But are you talking about the consent from the
From the person
person
itself,
itself?
yeah.
No, I think that that is not the case that is managed by this plugin, because let's say this is a TB implementation, so they would be registering the cases in any way, whether it's an Excel or any other data, and the the data on these people is already present in the civil registry. So at this stage, there's no consent given there. But from what I know in reality, is that the once the people are registered, let's say in a TB registry, and then if they don't want to appear in any kind of statistics as individual, they can remove that consent, and then the data will be anonymized. But that is a different that's a use case that you will have to govern within your implementation, not within this.
Presently, the DHIS2 cannot be connected with the CVRS. This is not a case based. DHIS2 is working actually on the aggregated data, and CVRS is totally a case based. Like when a birth or a death occurs, there will be a registration, if I'm correct.
I think we're talking about different registries, because in my example with Uzbekistan, we're talking about the database from the Ministry of Interior, that where every citizen has a national ID, and so that will just fetch their data into DHIS2, and we're talking about tracker. We're talking about
Tracker,
case-based data.
Yeah, for tracker.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Just a quick question on the OTP. Did you use Google Authenticator or the SMS, the OTP?
We
Have you used for the credential
no
authentication, I mean?
no.
Yeah.
So they have specifically in Uzbekistan, they're using single sign-on, and the
Oh, single
most-
sign-on.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know there are some outstanding questions, but I think we'll move on to the next session, and we'll have some more time for questions at the end of the session. Okay, so I'll ask Jason to go ahead and walk us through the data exchange app.
Test, test. Can you hear me? All right, looks like it. Okay. Get rid of this here if I can. Okay, I'm back on stage. This time talking about the aggregate data exchange service and app. This is a relatively new feature. I think it's been around for a while, though. It's not completely new. We've made a lot of updates recently, both to the backend service, thanks to our colleagues from HISP Vietnam, as well as to the front-end app produced by the Oslo development team. I've been working specifically over the past year or so with the Global Fund, who is implementing their own version of DHIS2, their own instance basically, to facilitate collection of data from the countries that they work with. This was a a big initiative on their part. Previously, they collected a lot of data via Excel and wanted basically to try and streamline a lot of this collection that they need to collect from their countries. There was already a sort of pilot initiative that the Global Fund had used to collect data specifically on COVID during that time, and has now been expanded to basically the whole portfolio of Global Fund indicators. I know that a number of other countries, I think Pakistan also is using the aggregate data exchange, right? So I know that there are some other uses of this, but we wanted to go through briefly. I've got, what, half an hour, John? Something like that. 20 minutes. All right, so I'll have to go quick. To show you both, what can this do and basically how to use it. So yeah, there's a new backend service and app in 239 and above. It allows the transfer of aggregate data between a source instance and a target instance. And this target instance can be the same instance, actually. It can either be a remote DHIS2 instance, another DHIS2 instance that's located somewhere else. There can also be an internal exchange, and I'll explain the differences between those two. The exchanges can be scheduled, so you can automatically run this like every day, for instance. You can trigger it via the API, maybe if you're using like an external script, for instance, or performed by a user using the new data exchange app. So here are some example use cases. This is certainly not exhaustive, and I suspect that people are probably going to come up with things that we didn't think about. But one of the primary use cases is a transfer of data from, say, a national HMIS instance to a regional data warehouse. So you might think about exchanging data between your national HMIS and the WHO Global Malaria Program, or the Global Fund, for instance. So instead of having to fill out some Excel sheet or log onto their instance to re-enter the data, it would be a lot easier if you can just, get the data right out of your HMIS and send it onwards to their DHIS2 instance. Another very common use case is the transfer of tracker to aggregate. So going from event-based data to aggregate data. And one of the primary reasons for doing that, it could be because your tracker data and your aggregate data bases are separate. In many cases, you may want to keep the tracker-based system completely separated from your aggregate instance, either for security reasons or other reasons. In certain cases, they may be all integrated together. In other cases, they may be completely separate. So it would facilitate the transfer of the aggregated event tracker-based type of analytics to your national HMIS. It could also be the internal transfer of data from event-based data to aggregate data. And so why would you want to do that? Well, typically it's because of performance reasons. So if you're looking at aggregated data that's already been processed, then it's typically orders of magnitude faster than having to go from the event-based data and aggregating that in real time and then displaying it on the dashboard. So if you can pre-aggregate all of that and sort of push it in aggregate format, that may serve the needs of users that only need to have access to the aggregated data. Yeah, this is another one I think that we've seen as well, the aggregation of data from facility level to a national level portal. So you might want to have a portal that is open to the public, for instance, but you don't want to necessarily expose facility level data. So you might want to aggregate the data from facility level to something higher and give that to a broader audience of people, basically. So those are some of the use cases. It's definitely not exhaustive, but those are the ones that came to mind. Anybody else that's maybe using the data exchange might have another use case? Yeah, Hanan? Okay. You could have used my mic, I guess. Yeah, that one's hot.
Thank you. We have a use case where we're using for urban health data. So we are implementing an urban health system from last year. So the idea is this is a case-based system. So this is a tracker which actually collecting data on the all service provided at the facility level. So the facility, the service provider, they enter in the data. This actually aggregated and send it to the for the annual development plan and Asian Development Bank reporting. So they are an aggregated template. So we actually put the data every month so they can review and say it's approved. And after that is actually using the ADX aggregated actions to the aggregate data set from where we publish those two specific reports. So this is the ADB report is a 65-page report, pre-formatted report. So that's we make on portal. So from that we send to the portal as well.
Yeah.
So that is our use case we're using. And I think this is a good example because this is a cross-checking. So it's creating data, aggregate data from the case-based system. So there is no manipulation possible. So it's a good, for our case, it's a good improvement in the data quality as well.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. So that's sort of what aggregate data exchange can do. In terms of specific features, any aggregate data can be exchanged, all right? We're talking about aggregate data. We're not talking about tracker or events. It's strictly aggregate data here. It can be data elements. It can be indicators. It can also be program indicators. So basically any of these types of metadata objects that can produce aggregated data can be exchanged. It's very important to point out that data can only be pushed, okay? Cannot be pulled. So this was a very conscious design decision, right? What we did not want to implement was sort of give, you know, a global organization keys to your system. So this allows you to decide when you're going to push the data. It doesn't say that, you know, if you're working with a global fund or the ADB or WHO or whoever it might be, PEPFAR, they can't go into your system and pull it out. It only allows you to push the data into another external system when you choose, basically. Yeah, I mentioned this, data can be exchanged at any level of the hierarchy. It could be at the facility level, but for instance, I don't know, you know, in the case of ADB, perhaps you're only sending them, you know, subnational 1 level data or national level data, as opposed to individual facility level data. Again, that's up for you to configure, and I can show that in a minute. Data can be exchanged for either relative or fixed periods. It can also be for aggregated periods. So like in the case that Hanan pointed out, when you're collecting data by in events or tracker, that's collected on a daily basis, but perhaps you only want to share, maybe you need to give a quarterly report. So you're not going to give that data by day, and you could aggregate that data and push it to you know, the ADB in quarterly format, but for your own instance, you might want to have a daily aggregate summary, right? So depending on what the exact use case is, you could use either fixed periods. Normally relative periods make sense, you know, last 12 months, last 52 weeks, last 10 days, something like that, because then you can regularly sync the data over time. It's also possible to use fixed periods, but relative periods normally are better. You can use a filter. A common example for this might be if you're, I don't know, I'm just dreaming something up here. But let's say that you're working with a global donor that's supporting a subset of your facilities. So they're only working, you have to provide them a report, but it's only these facilities that they need a report from. You can use a filter, an organization unit group to say, okay, we're going to send facility level data, but we're only going to send this particular group of organization units. So you can apply basically any type of filter to the request. There are also support for multiple coding schemes. And this is a little bit difficult to understand, but you can think of it, if you're, let's say, having to exchange data with both WHO as well as the ADB, they might have different coding schemes, right? for the same data element, number of cases of malaria, for instance. WHO might have a coding scheme that says this is the code for this data element, and ADB might have a coding scheme to say this is their code for the data element. It's the same in your system, but you could apply a different code depending on who you're having to send the data to, essentially. So how does this actually happen? There are basically 3 properties that you need to set on the metadata object that you want to exchange. And by metadata object, I mean data element, indicator, or program indicator. And you may have noticed this in your version of DHIS2. There are 2 new properties that are available on these metadata objects called category option combination for data exchange and attribute option combo for data exchange. The third thing that you need as well is the data element, right? And that's normally used, that can be configured using an attribute. It's also possible to use an attribute for, these are data element UIDs, and this is a attribute option combo UID. But again, given the flexibility of the coding, you can use an attribute basically to support multiple types of coding schemes, depending on exactly what your use case is. But if you've noticed this in the maintenance UI for data elements and indicators, the reason is because of aggregate data exchange. So all of this needs to be configured up front. You need to know what the code is on the destination system. It might be the UID. It could also be a code. And that needs to be configured in your instance. Now for internal data exchanges, it's basically the same thing as well. Because remember, for an internal data exchange, you might want to calculate a program indicator that represents a particular data element category option combination. So you might have number of cases of malaria, less than 5 female, right? That would be a particular, that would be one program indicator. And that would map to one data element category option combination. And that would need to be configured in the program indicator for number of cases of malaria, male less than 5. It would be a different category option combination, but the same data element. So you would need to configure all of that mapping basically up front. So this is what the UI looks like. I'll show it in demo form. It's not really super clear on the screen. I hope it's better via Zoom. Data exchanges can consist of multiple requests. So you can organize basically one exchange, and then you can have multiple requests within the exchange. The exchange can either be internal or external. External refers to a remote server. Internal refers to within your own system, basically. External exchanges can be used with either a username or a DHIS2 token. We recommend for security purposes that you use a token as opposed to a username and password. And each request can have a single input coding scheme. Input coding scheme refers to what is happening on the target server. So how should the target server interpret all of the codes or UIDs that you're sending to it? Now, each exchange can consist of multiple requests, and any request can be filtered on any dimension. I mentioned this, that it could be filtered by organization unit group. You might only want to include a subset of facilities, for instance. It's possible to link to a visualization, and the reason that you might want to do that is to allow people to look at the data, the aggregated data, whatever you're going to send in the data visualization app prior to actually sending it. Data items, and I put this in quotes, these, as I mentioned, can consist of any combination of data elements, indicators, or program indicators. Periods can be fixed or relative. Yeah, and I mentioned this support for multiple output coding schemes. And output coding schemes refers to the coding scheme that's going to be produced and then sent onwards to the external server, basically. So you might want a request that uses codes. You might run a request that uses UIDs, and all of that needs to be configured as part of the request. This coding scheme stuff gets a little bit tricky and hard to understand. We've tried to, the best way I think is maybe with trial and error. But I did want to try and maybe explain what this means. Output refers to the coding scheme which the aggregate data request will produce. Okay. So if you've maybe seen this in the data visualizer, you can export data either with UID, with a code, or with a name. And the aggregate data exchange service is using the exact same analytic service, basically. So you can say output this request with a UID, output this request with a code, output this request with an attribute. So that's basically what this means, is how are we going to output the organization unit? Should it be a code or should it be a UID? Well, the input refers to what the remote server is going to interpret that as. Is it a code or is it a UID, right? So the terminology is a little bit confusing, but I think if you play around with it, it will make a lot more sense. This is what the app looks like. Again, the resolution is not great here. It's not installed by default, but it is available on the App Hub. You can just go to the DHIS2 App Hub and search for Data Exchange, and you can download and install the app. It does allow the user to preview the data, and that might be important, particularly if you're sending a report to the ADB. You might want to take a look at what you're sending them. Maybe, you might not. But that's what the app is for, is to allow users to like look at the data prior to sending it to be sure that it looks okay. I wanted to include some limitations that we found thus far. Very large requests may time out. And what is large? That's hard to say, right? It depends on a lot of factors. I'm just going to say large can mean many data elements. It can mean many data items. It can really depend. But what we have seen is that very large requests may take too long, particularly if you're using the app. What will happen in the app is after a certain amount of time, then the server will time out, right? The reverse proxy server will time out, and you'll get an error in the browser. Now, if you're using the scheduler, this may not happen because everything is happening through the back end, but it can be smart to test this out and make things small, basically. Things that will complete within, say, 10 minutes. If it takes longer than that, then it's probably not going to work, and you're going to have to use the scheduler in order to actually perform that. One major limitation is there's no easy way to delete data that you need to delete. And a very common, I think we talked about this, I heard about this from Pakistan, is that what can happen, particularly with case-based data, is let's say you've got a case on today, but then a case of TB, right? Somebody comes in, they're diagnosed with TB, but they're recorded as having yellow fever, right? They're misdiagnosed. What happens is you perform the data exchange, and then it gets into the aggregate data, and the disease surveillance officer says, uh-oh, we got a case of yellow fever, and all sorts of alarm bells go off, and somebody's going to go back, follow this up, and says, oh, no, we just made a data entry error, and they correct the diagnosis to TB instead of yellow fever. Problem is, and you want to perform the aggregate data exchange again, but that data is like null. It doesn't exist, right? So there's no way to delete that data easily and I say easily, there's always a way to delete it, but there's not an automatic way to do it, right? So you may have to flush the data, you may have to go in and manually delete it, but there's no easy way to kind of transmit that the data needs to be deleted on the remote instance. Yeah, I put this as a limitation. But again, data cannot be pulled. This is by design. There have been some people that have asked for this, but it's specifically designed not to be able to pull data. But it is a limitation. You might have an instance, particularly if you're working internally, you want to pull data from, say, you have a tracker instance and you want to pull that into your aggregate system. There's no way to do that. It has to be pushed. There's limited authentication options right now, only username and password, and the DHIS2 token is supported. Hopefully that will be expanded, but that is a definite limitation. This token expires after a certain amount of time. Using usernames and passwords is maybe not super secure. So that can also be in a limitation. Yeah, and again, currently only aggregate is supported, so you can't push events, you can't push tracker data. And I see I'm up for time, just in time for the demo. I'll just give a really quick demo here. I'm using the using one of the global fund systems here, and this basically represents the global fund side. Okay. And you can see that there's no data here for June 2024 for Vanuatu. But this is representing the countryside. So let's say that I'm in Vanuatu and this is what my system is, and I want to push data to the global fund. I can choose this, and I should get a preview of my data. So this allows you to see all of the data that you have configured, basically. I'll just show you the configuration really quickly. Most of this stuff is documented. You know, we specify that this is the target, uat.8x.theglobalfund.org. And we've got a request here. And we've specified these 1, 2, 3, 4 indicators. All this is fake data. Not real. For the last 12 months for Sierra Leone. So we're saying, I just changed this. I changed the code from Sierra Leone to Vanuatu just so that we can see this. But you can see the point of this is that we've now aggregated the data to the national level. So the only thing that we're going to send to the Global Fund is national level data. We don't send them the disaggregated facility level data. And then we specify the various coding schemes here. This is, we're using a coding scheme called an attribute Global Fund data element ID. And the organization unit ID is code. And in this case, just the ISO 3 code for Vanuatu. Okay, so I can cancel all of that. We go back here, edit, choose this. Need to exit configuration mode. Go back to the demo. And the moment of truth here, we'll say submitting data. And then I say 60 imported, 0 updated, 0 ignored. So that's good. That means that 60 values were transmitted from the country instance to the remote instance. Now, if we go back to what represents the global fund system, and we check for May 2024, then we see data for there. We go back to June 2024 when there was no data. Then we should see 428 for CM1A. And if we go back here, let's see, did we get the right number? 428 right there. So CM1A, June 2024 is 428 on the national system representing Vanuatu. And in the remote system, we see the exact same number in the data entry app. So that's basically how it works. There's more documentation out there. We've got a couple of deeper dive presentations that we could provide you with as well. When we conducted a academy in Addis a couple of months back. That's it. I hope it gave you a good overview. I don't know if we have time for questions, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so we'll take some questions at the end. I'll just ask Jorn and Em if they can come up now and proceed with our final presentation for the session on the TB migrant system.
Ska ha mycket.
can just like keep that. Not like Mick Jagger, you know. Where do I change? Just this one. Okay, good. Yes, yeah, this is working. I can hear it myself. So we are presenting is myself and M also. We share it. I start, and he will continue on the last part of it. This is about the regional database. Region meaning the 5 Mekong region countries like Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. And basis for this referral system and regional TB database is a general DHIS2 TB database following WHO standard and so-called package, but it's including a specific referral module, meaning that there's a lot of features that are specially designed for enable referrals between countries. And central is the so-called TB09, which is a relatively standardized referral format. And what has been done is that we have different languages in different countries. So data variables have been identified, translated, org unit hierarchy from TB units, province, not districts, and country are both translated and included from all these countries. User roles created, and important, a general SOP is created and specific for the pilots between Cambodia and Vietnam. So the motivation for having a specific focus on migrant is that migrant TB patients, they are kind of ignored and they are kind of suffering from a lot of problems, and they are easily missed out of the TB systems, lost to follow up when they are crossing borders or just moving around. So the project is kind of addressing the TB, the TB in migrants and trying them to ensure that they are followed up and to generally focus on TB in migrants. And one of the general problems with TB and migrants is that countries are generally not so very inclined to include them in their systems and databases, etc., because they are all reporting cure rates to WHO. And since migrants are kind of on the move and tend to miss out, that's kind of always impacting on the cure rate of the countries, and they don't like it. So that's a reason why many are kind of not so very focused on including migrants in their different schemes and databases. Of course, the countries in this project, the 5 countries, they have agreed to never do anything harmful against migrants and include them in the databases, etc. While in practice, it's easily missed out. And that is kind of the motivation then for this TB database, migrant TB database project. So all the Mekong countries, they have included foreigners, which is the definition of migrants. It's a simple definition. They are all include them in their national databases, but they are kind of categorized differently. Some are just not categorized at all, like at least earlier in Vietnam, they couldn't really
identify foreigners, whereas others have so and so many nationalities that are kind of using as categories. This is, of course, a slight problem when it comes to statistics, etc., and to follow up of migrants on a kind of a higher level. And it's worth to note that many countries not in this region are simply expelling foreigners that are testing positive for TB. For example, Malaysia. That's the first plane out if you're testing. And that's, of course, that stigma is the reason for many of these problems with TB in migrants. And these are the countries that are part of the project. Of course, Myanmar is not really active in this because of the war and problems, and there are not really any contacts with the official health system and Ministry of Health there, apart from NGOs along the border. And these are how it's actually working in practice. It's a referral of TB patients between countries. This is a typical example between Thailand and Laos PDR. They are having point-to-point transfers between what they call twin hospitals. And they're using different methods. They have their own kind of setups, and there's no systematic approach, and they're using Line or WhatsApp to send messages, and they have telephone calls, and it's one referral, online referral system we identified. And these are who made that are located in Chiang Rai province, and we have actually worked with them after that. We kind of identified them as the only kind of systematic way to do referrals. And again, if you look at the Myanmar border to Thailand, there the referrals are kind of physically carried out by an NGO, which are kind of following the patients over to the other side and using a paper-based system. And what is important when it comes to TB general is that, first this one, then just an overview. We have started a pilot in between Vietnam and Cambodia, and we'll tell about that. And we are testing referrals between Thailand and Laos PDR, and they have agreed to start a pilot once we have these things organized. And the challenges generally is that every time you try to deal with the data between two countries, then they will come up with data sharing agreements. And that is raised as a concern also here, of course. What we are saying is that patients are actually referred in any cases. So, I mean, whether it's a data sharing agreement or not, data and patients need to be kind of transferred across the border. So that is kind of the general approach to that. And another problem is that there are different standards for these so-called standardized TB09 referral forms. And that's also true, and we have some approaches to that also, and that is to be a bit pragmatic and use what is at hand in the country that is referring out the patients. And what is also quite a big challenge is that all the countries in the region have different scripts and languages. These are then Bangkok written in the 5 different languages, but more importantly than the scripts between the countries. And you see that the problem is that, of course, when you do referrals of patient, then you fill in forms, etc. But the patients who are going, say, from Vietnam to Cambodia will not necessarily be able to spell the name neither in Vietnamese nor English. And that is a kind of a problem in the general general referrals of patients across the borders in this region. This is the kind of the age-old workflow. I think it's emanating from the WHO long back. I heard the story once, and that is kind of, you send the referrals consist of a form where you have them the patient demographics, you have the treatment and the diagnosis. That's one part. And then you have two other parts, which is the feedback. One is that you have a receipt of the referrals when the patient is arriving on the other side, and then you have the treatment outcome. And the treatment outcome is what is kind of messing up all the cure rates in countries, and the general reason why they are not so interested in handling foreigners in referring out of countries. And we have put up this. This is then the kind of the standard operation procedure and how this is translated into the regional database. And we see that there's a lot of reply messages for these feedback messages. Patient is received. This is the outcome, and these messages are then going both to the referring unit and also to the national TB department. And you see here that we have the country TB database in each countries, but there are the different ways these TB databases are included in the setup, because some countries require that referrals must go from the national database to the national database. That was the start of the work in Thailand, for example. They required that it had to go from their database. Whereas, for example, as I mentioned, others of different reasons prefer it to actually be a point-to-point referrals across the borders with as little as possible interference with the national databases. So we have then kind of a number of different scenarios which are possible from automatic kind of referrals from national to national databases via the regional database, and where one side can send from the database and the other can just download as Excel and print out. So there are many varieties that are possible. And what we are testing out in between Cambodia and Vietnam, that is actually point-to-point referrals between the two parties using the online systems. Whereas what we try to do in Laos and Thailand is then to send more automatically from Laos side, and to receive it or download it as a Excel in Thailand and upload to their system by that. So this is what we are about to test out. And of course, we have this. We have the example of Myanmar also, where say Thailand will say send it electronically, but then you will download or print, and the patient and the NGOs will carry it over to the other side. But what actually was tested with this first example I mentioned is that you have a person with online access on the Myanmar side. That's also possible, and it's been some efforts to achieve that also. So this, what we can call a pragmatic approach to address the different challenges. For example, the requirements from Thailand is that we don't want any interference, direct contact from a non-national software with our national software. That's why we came up and said that, okay, but then let's do it semi-automatic via Excel. You can download Excel and upload Excel. Then it's okay. Then there's no direct link between the two. And another obstacle was that, but all countries have different TB09 standards. And then we are saying that we cannot wait for agreed standards because we know that standardization is something that will take forever. So the suggestion is for each of these kind of twin systems, and the referring out country standards will be used as a rule, as a start. And then if the receiving country want to have other data in addition, then okay, then they can request that. And if they actually needing less, which is as often, then it's not a problem. So then we have this other general problem of no data sharing agreements. And then we are saying that these cross-border refers are happening anyway, and you have to kind of somehow cater for the migrants when crossing the borders. So it's better to use a systematic approach and to agree on some kind of a standard operating procedure. That's better than what is happening now. And also, the other side can access and download and feedback on these TB09 things, and the two parties can organize that. And what we are doing with these different scripts and languages, that's actually also the same for different standards. And because one thing is that the users cannot really understand on the other side. So the solution to that is just to print out the forms in both languages and English. And also we can print out in the standard TB09 format they like, if we set it up like that. That's the one way to also address the not really the shared standards. So as I mentioned, and tied to Thailand, to Myanmar, we have this possibility of paper mix, and that's quite useful to print out in the two languages and English when referring to Myanmar. Piloting Vietnam and Cambodia. It's you.
So this one I will continue with Professor Jones about the TB migrants currently do in the pilots in the border of Vietnam and Cambodia. So we are doing pilots for the three provinces of Srai Vin, Ta Keo, and An Giang and Tây Ninh. So this is the map is in the south of the Vietnam. So this one in this project this one a list of hospitals involving for the An Giang province. We have 17 hospital, and Tây Ninh is 14 hospital. In Cambodia, so we are also have for the CNAS and Ta Keo province for 8 hospital and Srai Vin for 10 hospital, and also other TB units. So what we have achieved until now, that we have already conduct a lot of meeting and the training for two countries, that's Vietnam and Cambodia. That is, we also include the bilateral meeting and the training, and we develop the application which on the picture needed for the referral, including and translation on the metadata, because as you see from the beginning, that's the language and the script of 5 countries is different. So this one is Vietnamese and Cambodia. So in order to understand and using the system, we only provide on the translation, and also the video of the how to use the system with the subtitle in Vietnamese and Khmer. So this one is the challenge, of course, from the Vietnam and Cambodia, when the patient come to do the treatment in Vietnam and then go back they always have the problem because they will from Cambodia to Vietnam, they will bring back with the patient profile, the treatment in Vietnamese, and from Cambodia to Vietnam in Khmer, so the doctor cannot use it. So this one we only solve the problem for them. But we have the challenge that at John only said that less data for the file loss province and the internet, of course, in Vietnam is better. We have some problem with the internet in Cambodia, and the workflow also different. So this one is the application that we only develop. We call it using it the eye capture developed by HISP Vietnam with all the picture necessary. Especially that is the searching by the keyword. For example, if you using the tracker capture, you can also only searching with the first name for different field. But this case, we only apply the keywords. So you just enter any keyword to do the search, and then for the patient, so we allow them to do the patient profile, patient with the TB09 form in multiple languages. If they want to bring Vietnamese, Khmer, they just click and select the language to bring. And then the picture that we are working on is about the message sent to the user for Cambodia. That we try to use the Telegram, but for other countries like Laos and Vietnam, we are using different. Vietnam, we are trying to use to send to Yellow and Lao for the WhatsApp, and other picture that we are. So this one is some of the screen. You can see this one for the register new patient. This one if they are logging with the account in Khmer language for Cambodia, they will see the form on works in Khmer, and this one is the account with the Vietnamese version. They will see it in Vietnamese. Even this, we only have one metadata, one program, and one data element set. And then after they register the new patient, they can need to enter order like the baseline with the information like the sign up, they see the treatment history and other information, and then they enter the treatment. This one is not, we just collect some information enough for the transfer based on the TB09. We are not collect on the information like the TB case surveillance. This one is just focusing on the transfer only. So after that, if they want to transfer the patient out of the country, they just click on the stage called transfer out and enter the information, and then click on the transfer out. That's on. After that, they will in the site, or the site will receive the notification by message or email, and then they will accept that patient or not by enter the acceptance stage. So to bring out, so like this one is just the TB09, so they just 3 steps, select the patient from the list. They can do the search, select the patient in the list. This one is to bring the TB09 and then select the language. Like now we are supporting English, Vietnamese and Khmer. Later we can set box for more like Lao and Thai. This one they from the same form they can bring in Khmer or in Vietnamese. So this is what we have done for the application on the form and the reports based on the TB09 form. So this is all about the TB migrants with the, so you have any question? And I will return this one to Nick.
Okay, thank you, Em. So I know it's getting a little late, of course. If you do have any questions for either presenters, Jason or Emma and Jorn, if you're kind of tired, I understand you can leave, but for those who want to stay, please do so.
Yeah, just a quick question to the previous presentation about the exchange app. Just out of the curiosity, for example, if I have two DSS two accounts, one that I am the super user, and another one is that I am the user only. I just wonder, um, to transfer the data from the user account to another DSA2 instance that I am the super users, is it possible, or do I need to have the permission from the super user of the first DSA2 account?
Yeah, so I didn't go into detail about this. On the server that you're transferring data to, you need to have the right permissions to transfer data. And what those permissions are, you need to be able to import data. You need to have access to the data set that you're transferring data for. And you need to have the permission to import data. I think I already said that maybe. Yeah. But you absolutely don't need to be a super user, right? And it's definitely not recommended. And the reason for that is that, you know, on your local instance, those credentials are stored. The username, the password is encrypted. So it's you can't get to it basically, but still not ideal. That's why we recommend the use of a token instead of a username and password, right? But yeah, on the remote system, you absolutely don't need to be a super user. You just need to have the correct permissions to import the data, basically. On your local instance, and I didn't go into this in detail, but you can also decide who has access to perform the data exchange. So in the case of, say, you know, you might be transferring data, the TB program officer might be transferring data to the global TB program, but that specific user should have the authority to do that. But like nobody else, like he holds the ultimate authority essentially. So you can configure the exchange to say that many users can view the exchange, but only one particular user can actually transfer the data to the remote server. And again, that user doesn't need to be a super user on your instance. They just need to have enough permission to be able to see the data, to see the data exchange app. But there's no reason why you have to have a super user involved. But you know, it does require the correct configuration. I hope that helped to explain. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for introducing these great features into the DHIS2. I think it will help a lot. So I have a couple of very short questions. So the first one is that the data can be transferred from data element indicator or program indicator. So in the destination, it will be transferred to the data element. So my
Correct.
question is whether we can use the same data element in the destination in the data set. In another, I've seen that you have configured a lot of data transfer. So whether we are transfer manually or it can be scheduled, and also the app, which version of DHIS2 can support this app?
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. I'll try to remember all of those. So you need at least version 239 for this to work. It should work at all versions after 239, as far as I know. What? Oh yeah, can it be the same data element? Yeah, it could be, absolutely, right? Yeah, I mean, a good example of this might be if you're using a standardized metadata package from WHO, right? This is a theoretical example, but let's say that you're using one of the metadata packages from WHO on whatever, TB, and you're transferring data to the global TB program. They might also be using that exact same data element, right, with the same UID. So yeah, you could. It could absolutely work that way. You had one more question as well.
It was about the transfer. Can we schedule the transfer so it happen automatically?
Yeah, I mentioned that it can either be done through the app. It can also be scheduled regularly, or you could also trigger it via the API. You might have some complicated job that you need to script, basically. So yeah, those are kind of the three ways that you could do it. Yeah.
Any other questions for Jason or Jorn and M on the TB migrants?
Yeah, in theory you could, right? But that external system would need to understand the DHIS2 payload, right? So yeah, you could do it, right? But that external system would need to know how to interpret what you're sending it. But yeah, I mean, you could think about a theoretical situation where you have some external web service that can consume a DHIS2 JSON file that's well described and documented. Yeah, I don't see why it couldn't happen, right? It doesn't have to be DHIS2, but that external system would need to know how to interpret what the server is sending it, basically.
Sorry,
If-
what's the
Yeah,
question?
it could be, right? I mean, I don't see any reason why it couldn't happen, but you would have to write some web service on that side to say, okay, you know, this is a DHIS2 data payload, and I need to know how to decode that. But it's just JSON, right? It's just standard format. It's well documented. So yeah, I mean, it could be done in theory, I think.
Okay,
Sorry, can I
so
can I
think
ask
that
a
will wrap
question?
up the session for today since we're a little over time as it is. So yeah, thank you everyone for your patience. I know we're a little over time today, but we'll wrap up for today. We'll start again tomorrow. There's no parallel sessions tomorrow, so we'll all be in this big room. We'll start up again at 9 o'clock in the morning. And yeah, everyone have a good evening and we'll see you tomorrow. Okay, thank you.
Surajit, can I just ask a question?